Those of us who do mission understand that it is not always perfect. And there are challenges that go along with short-term missions that we need to talk about. And we need to talk about the future of short-term missions and how we can do missions better, not just for those that we go and serve, but for those that go and serve. And so Dr. Kim Lamberty is here she's the Director of Catholic Engagement and Outreach at Changing the Way We Care. And she's going to share some thoughts about where we are now with short-term missions. And then after she does that, she's going to introduce the rest of the panel. So, Dr. Kim?
Can you guys hear me? Is my mic on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. So thanks for having me here. As Laura said, I'm with the Changing the Way We Care initiative, which is an initiative of Catholic Relief Services, Maestral, and Lumos. And I represent Catholic Relief Services in that initiative. And I want to just say, I feel like the Catholic Church is a little late to this conversation. I'm grateful to be part of this really great group that's been grappling with these issues for longer than my faith community. So I also just want to let you know, for those of you who aren't aware, Catholic Relief Services is the International Relief and Development Agency of the Catholic Church in the U.S. We're fully owned by the U.S. Catholic bishops. We work in 120 countries worldwide. We have 7,000 employees. And so we do work with vulnerable children and family care worldwide. So that is what one of the issues that CRS is engaged in. So I am here, however, in my capacity as a short-term mission specialist. I lead short-term missions. I do it because I enjoy it. Especially to Haiti, where I have 20 years of experience. So I want to just say that, and then now I want to introduce our awesome panelists, all of whom have really great experience and thoughts to offer this conversation. I think you met Nicole in the last panel, so I'm not going to read her bio again, but Nicole is with CAFO. And you met Ellie also, so I'm also not going to read Ellie's bio again. Ellie is with Faith to Action. We also have with us, and now I have to put my glasses on, Tori Rourke. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Tori. Tori is the CEO and short-term mission coach for Standards of Excellence. And Tori began leading and training short-term mission teams with Delta Ministries in 2004 and became COO of Standards of Excellence in 2016. He's served all over the world and has mobilized teams in many countries. Tori has a Master of Divinity from Western Seminary and lots of practical experience in STMs. And we have Kate Borders, who is Senior Director of Mobilization for World Orphans. Kate has been with World Orphans for 10 years, is passionate about their mission to help equip, inspire, and mobilize the church to care for orphaned and vulnerable children. She's honored to be part of this ministry, working to see churches engaged in this issue. So I want to start out just by, as Laura said, kind of describing the landscape of short-term mission, especially as it relates to the issues that we're discussing today. And then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk about how their organization in particular relates to this issue. So why are we talking about short-term mission? I'm sure most of you already know the answer. But just to say, at least 2 million Christians from the United States go on short-term mission overseas annually. So, and that is a minimal number. It is a huge number. It is a number that has enormous potential to be a catalyst for global transformation. Not only with orphans and vulnerable children, but in general, in context of poverty and violence worldwide. And the question is, are we doing that? Are we living up to our potential for transformation? And I think most of us who are in this field would say, actually, no, we're not. And in the sector of working with orphans and vulnerable children, many of us would say, actually, short-term missions have become part of the problem. Because short-term missions have become push factors, right, for sustaining residential care for children globally. They provide funding and service workers and support, right, that supports residential care for children. And we know that residential care for children is involved in family separation, right? As the church, at least as the Catholic Church, but I think for all of us, support for families, and in particular support for vulnerable families, is at the heart of our identity. Right, so we really, I think today are inviting all of us to look at short-term missions to see how we can become part of the solution. And I would just add to that, in general, the issues around short-term mission as it relates to residential care for children, it's bigger than just us, right? In other words, short-term mission in general tends to focus on what I call plate-based ministry, right, where people are going to go build something or serve something or teach something, and we're not really looking at how we address the underlying issues of why people seem to be in need in the first place. And my challenge would be, can we look at root causes, and how can short-term missions be part of the solution rather than part of enabling the problem? So that is my introduction to the landscape of short-term mission, and I want to turn it over and give each of our panelists an opportunity to talk about how their organizations are becoming part of the solution, and starting with Rory.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and I don't know if it was a typo or if I just got a promotion. I think you said CEO of SOE. I'm actually COO, but just to be clear on that.
Thank you. We all had a meeting yesterday, actually, so it's not even our first conversation, even though it sounds like it.
Okay. Yeah, so I work with Standards of Excellence in short-term mission. If you've never heard of it before, we came about in the late 90s when mission leaders came together and said, this is a really big deal. Millions of people are doing it, and it's not going away, but we don't really even know how to evaluate what was a good trip, what wasn't a good trip. Is this a good program or not? Parents and kids are saying, I want to go with this. I want to go here or there. Adults, how do we know who's good or not? Sometimes I say, I compare it to an atmosphere where hotels get to determine their own star rating. And in an atmosphere like that, you just don't know what you're getting. So the leaders came together and prayed and studied and surveyed and came up with 7 standards that said, if you have these 7 standards involved in your trip or in your program, then you can be assured that you have an excellent short-term mission going on. And it had to be process related, because you just can't use an end product to determine the quality of a short-term mission trip. It just doesn't work that way. So they came up with the 7 standards, which are God-centeredness, empowering partnerships, mutual design, comprehensive administration, qualified leadership, appropriate training, and thorough follow-through. So I'll be the first one to admit that I'm not the expert on orphan and vulnerable child care, but nor is SOE. But SOE is kind of the expert on how to do short-term missions well. And you're going to hear from Nicole and Ellie and Kate. And what you're going to hear a lot is, and even see in some of these best practices, is how the things that they talk about fit into the overall structure of these 7 standards, and being able to apply them, being able to apply those standards to your context using the unique, specific information you need for this for this area of orphan and vulnerable children. So I'm excited to participate, and that kind of gives you an idea of the lens I come from.
Great. Thank you. Nicole, I want to turn it over to you. Is there a mic somewhere? Yeah, you've got it. Okay.
Sure. So I just want to back up a second and just share like a smidge of my story so that I can build some credibility with y'all. Because some of the things I think sometimes that we're saying about short-term missions can rub people the wrong way, and it can be very emotional, and it can feel, it can bring up a lot of feelings around regret or defensiveness or frustration or anything like that. So I would just invite you all, as we're having this conversation, that if you're experiencing that, notice it, but also try to be open to the learning and maybe save some of those thoughts too for the deep dive so that we can discuss some of your stories later. But I come from this world, absolutely grew up in evangelical culture, did short-term missions trips. I have a scrapbook full of pictures of Josefina and I in Mexico, and she doesn't know who I am now, but I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing. And then when my husband and I got married in our early 20s, we lived in Africa for a little over a year, and I was working with a foster care agency, and he was working, and then me part-time with a preschool that was attached to an orphanage. And we didn't see the discordance. Now, to put this in perspective, I grew up in a foster home. Like, my parents did foster care. I knew that kids needed families, but for some reason, I didn't see that in other places in the world that wasn't good for those kids there either. And chalk it up to youthful ignorance. But it wasn't until after that year we had built these bonds with kids, and there was one kid in particular, Patrick, who loved my husband. And on our last day, he chased us down the road sobbing when we left, and we were sobbing too. And it was, we literally laid on the floor and cried for like multiple, evenings in a row. It was awful. We didn't know what to do, but we knew that wasn't the right thing. And we knew that wasn't the right place for short-term missions. And so that began our quest to be involved with changing systems. So by the time I started working for CAFO about 7 years ago, I was very bitter towards short-term missions. I didn't think there was a place for it, and I didn't like it. And I started working with a bunch of researchers on this until one of them said to me, Nicole, this is a huge, this is like a giant battleship of a system that we have short-term missions, and it can be used for great good, but it can also be used for tremendous harm. What it can't be is you can't just stop the tide. You're not going to stop it. So you have to figure out how to transition it. You have to figure out how to be a part of that. And that began our process with CAFO of moving towards dozens of focus groups, working with more than 100 organizations to develop some standards and guidance. And our standards is heavily focused primarily around alternative models and case studies. And in that process, we were able to connect with SOE and their awesome work, and Faith to Action and their incredible work. And I just commend it all to you. And I will also say, we didn't bring any materials with us this time, but it's all free online. And I know that SOE has theirs online and Faith to Action has theirs online. So I would just encourage you all to engage with that, and just also let you know that there's some online trainings for your team. So if you're interested in that, we can talk more about that later.
Hi, I am a missions pastor at heart. I've been a missions pastor at a church in Seattle, and I also studied missions at Fuller, and so that's kind of my personal perspective. I love my job because I get to work with missions pastors all the time. Yeah, the microphone doesn't like me today. Now Faith to Action, really 12 years ago, we were founded around the desire to see Christians leading in supporting family-based care. As that progressed and great things have been happening and more people getting on board, this barrier crept in, and this distraction crept in, and it really was around short-term missions. We were seeing all of a sudden, in a nation that was making progress, we would see, because of an increase in support coming from short-term missions to orphanages, that model growing and growing. And so all of our sectors kind of took a double take. Me, I'd been working in short-term missions, so I got that. I, kind of had a desire to see missions continue to advance, and they were. That was when Walking with the Poor was being written by Bryant Myers, and that helped inform Helping Without Hurting, and Toxic Charity was coming out at that time. And so there's a lot of advance in general short-term missions. So there was so much to draw from, but just laying the principles in general short-term missions over this issue of orphan care, I think is so valuable. And so that's what Faith to Action has really done, is recognize the good work that SOE and others have done to say, it should support challenging root causes. It should be sustainable. It should be empowering. Let's do that when we talk about supporting orphans and vulnerable children. So we have worked in partnership. All of us have guidance out there. All of the guidance is the same. It's taken from different perspectives, but we're just trying to reach our audiences the best we possibly can. So we've been working together, giving feedback on each other's. We have some guidance over there. We really were talking, really, we have a really great grip with kind of the child protection experts, but also really ensuring that this is grounded and makes sense to a missions pastor or to a lay leader or to a team goer. So that's what we've been trying to do, is really build that bridge between what we know and seeing a lot of fruit of that. So it's been exciting.
Hello, again, I'm Kate Borders with World Orphans, and I think hopefully we're an example of benefiting from organizations like CAFO and Faith to Action and SOE. Tori did not ask me to say this, but anytime I get a microphone and talk about short-term missions, I say I can't highly recommend enough going through the process of becoming accredited with the Standards of Excellence. It was a game changer for us. It's big picture enough that it applies to any believer, any organization, any church, any school. It's kingdom minded, and then they ask specific enough questions that it drills down to any situation. So if you're not familiar with the standards, I just would very highly recommend you check it out and go through the process. And then CAFO and Faith to Action drill down even farther than Faith to Action on what does it look like to think well about short-term missions focused on orphan and vulnerable children. And as a word of encouragement, I would say that World Orphans as an organization, we partner with churches. We do family-based care through local churches, and our teams, I would say, just support what local churches are doing. I would love offline, I could tell you story after story of teams that come back really excited about supporting the work, and they haven't spent any time with children. They have spent time with churches and pastors and social workers and home-based care coordinators who are the ones there on the ground doing the work of seeing children staying in families. Certainly, I believe strongly that short-term missions can be part of the solution. I would humbly offer that the average short-term mission participant is not going to address the root causes. They're so big picture, and it's okay to just be honest about that. Our teams do not address root causes of poverty, but we can be a support and an encouragement to people who are. We can spend just a little bit of time encouraging that pastor, caregiver, whoever, to say, we're with you, you're not alone, we're praying for you, and how can we equip you to just keep doing what you're doing, and you are the one that can address some of the root causes.
Thank you. So I'm gonna ask you guys to answer one of the questions that we were given, and it's the first one around how does short-term mission, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but how does short-term mission relate to best practices in sustainable development? So, and each of us have talked about that a little bit already, but I want to just drill down on it only because it's my job to be challenging, I think. But I want to drill down on it a little bit and see if you all want to just go a little bit deeper and answer around the issues of sustainable development and best practices. And are there ways that short-term mission can really get at preventing family separation in the first place? So that parents don't think they have to put their children somewhere else because parents have the income to take care of the children themselves. So would anyone like to start out with that very difficult question?
Yeah, I'll let these guys speak to it more big picture, but as someone who oversees teams and planning trips, I think it is okay. We have to insist that our teams are prepared well, and I think teams doing research and reading and understanding these very big picture things so that they can say, wow, a lot of people might say, I had no idea, think historically, think about what the dynamics are. Nicole mentioned in the last session, there's a history of colonialism that we just with humility should be honest about. And when we understand the big bigger picture better, we can understand maybe what we have to offer and where we maybe aren't the best ones to offer solutions, so that we can get out of the way and let people who are able to address them.
So
make your team's research.
Yeah, Kate's talking about the important thing around formation and education, right? So that our teams understand the history and the context and the economic justice issues. And I think that's really, really important. Other answers around sustainable development and getting at root causes?
Yeah, Kim, what I think is we're talking about essentially right now what you're talking about is what we would call appropriate training, making sure the people going know what they need to know in order to be faithful, responsible, ethical missionaries. One of the things that really came to me when I got really familiar with the standards was how much goes into planning it before you even think about going on a mission trip. A lot of people that we engage with, they think the process of a short-term mission trip begins with when they decide to go or where they decide to go. But we really try to, when we engage with people, back all the way up to standard one, which is God-centeredness, and talk about God's call and how is God calling you, and what does that look like? What does it look like to put God at the center for Him to be glorified? And I think if we do that, then it tends to help maybe weed out the baby holders because it makes them feel good and those types of things. And then we move into empowering partnerships and we look at what that means. And of course, if we partner with the right people and we understand partnership in the right way and we approach our partners in the right way, then I think God-centeredness, getting ourselves out of the center, and that empowering partnership side, moving into the mutual design of a trip and understanding how to do that. I think those are really key to that sustainable part.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good points, especially around the issue of mutual design. Like, it's not us coming in and saying, here's what we're going to do, right? But rather there's mutuality with the community. And the other important point I think you made, although I'm going to just rephrase it, but I think this is what you're getting at, is that how we frame the trips in the preparation does determine the outcome of the trip. So if we frame the trip as you're going to go and hang out with babies, then that's what people are going to do and that's what they're going to get out of it. If we frame the trip as we're going to really try to look at the economic justice issues and try to understand root causes and try to understand if there is something we can do about them, then that's what people are likely to get out of it. And that, again, has to do with how you prepare your teams.
Yeah, and to be clear, you're using prepare, but I think I also hear you saying promote. So, and that's one of the things that, again, falls under, I think it falls actually under comprehensive administration for us, we call it. But we ask, how truthfully do you promote your trip? So it's not just once you get them in the door and prepare them, but even in how you're promoting them. How do you promote that trip? Is it
Exactly.
So yeah.
And so Ellie, you want to go next?
Yeah, well, first off, I think we have to recognize, as Nicole and Kim had said, that short-term missions are an incredible opportunity to bolster quality work happening on the ground. And let me just say, we need it. We need more support for family strengthening. We need more support for family-based alternative care, like foster care. We need more support for great programs that are really impacting families and children on the ground. So let's do that. I do think, though, like Tori said, that this stuff they created it's old, right? But it is still good. And a lot of what comes out of When Helping Hurts is old, but it's still good. And so let's take some of these principles that are building steam in the church, that people are starting to understand what we mean when we say sustainable. They're starting to understand what we mean when we talk about empowerment, when we say root causes, and lay that over this issue. And some of it is just understanding the issue a little bit. One of the principles there too is do no harm. And this is a tough one because it's the only negative one. But I think it is helpful to recognize that, the principle of do no harm. Whatever I'm doing, I want to make sure it's not causing further harm. And I think when you look at this specific issue of caring for really vulnerable children, there's two things to recognize around that principle. One, which is the most common that we talk about, but is very important, is the risk that it has to children. So that's when we talk about attachment and children who are in situations where they are struggling in whatever way around attachment and bonding. most children who are separated from their families or have been at any point, even as babies, and I think Dr. Karen could probably tell us a lot more about that. I didn't see her. They have that vulnerability. And so engaging with them is a risk. It could hurt them. The other is objectification. We hear this from people who have left orphanages that had volunteers coming in and out to say, I was just an orphan. I was labeled an orphan and I wasn't even an orphan. Or, in some extreme situations, I was told to act in a certain way in order to please the visitors. And so I think that objectification, obviously harm there. There's definitely harm to that. I think the other thing to consider that often gets forgotten, because maybe it's not as heartbreaking or something, or maybe it doesn't feel like we can actually do anything about it, but is kind of the larger impact that the industry of short-term missions has. You're an individual. I've taken a team of 3, of 5. What difference are we really making? But we are a part of 2 million people that are going, all of us thinking the same way. And that has created a kind of an industry around this. And that industry is maintaining a model of care that works great for short-term missions, but is not working for kids. And so recognizing in that consideration of that specific principle, do no harm, there's some things that we might not have known. And it's really just an awareness and a growing research behind it. So we don't need to feel bad or beat ourselves up about it. We're learning, we're understanding, we're growing. There's even research coming out now that is brand new regarding what is the impact on attachment. Like, is that a thing? Nicole has led some really great a paper on that in the Lancet. Yes, recently. So I think that is just helpful. Look at sustainability. If the organization, or if I'm going for 2 weeks without an organization that's like World Orphans that's doing incredible work every single day, what is my impact? I don't have to do that much if I'm supporting the work they're doing every single day. Same with things like empowerment. What does this feel like for a mom who's, what does it feel, what is my coming and what I'm doing? How is that empowering for the local leaders or for the local church or for the families there? These are well considered principles, and they're now mainstream. And I think we need to just consider what that means for serving vulnerable kids.
It's great, and the do no harm, I think, is a really important starting point, right? And for us to do a deep analysis from the very beginning to make sure that at the very least we are not damaging the context that we're going into, I think it's a really important point.
I think I would just affirm so much of what's been said. I would add one more point to it, and that's the idea of making sure that we begin as we mean to go, and that our drop in the bucket is moving in the right direction of the model that we want to see for these kids. Because, so I'll give you an example. I think it really just goes down to the model that we're setting up. We cannot make minor tweaks to bad models of short-term missions and expect that makes it okay. Sometimes we really need to overhaul. And people say to me, well, that makes our donors uncomfortable. That makes our supporters uncomfortable. But children aren't a means to an end. So I don't care if you're offering an excellent discipleship experience to Westerners. That would only be the icing on the cake. The cake itself, the actual substance, is this in the best interest of the child? So one example that I often give to people, I probably get at least one email a week from some organization saying, we did this thing where we try to make this little tweak, and now we're having this problem. One thing I often say is, think about a local church partner you could have. And think about what teams are doing when they're coming to visit. Is there a way to talk to the church and say, is there something valuable for this team to do? You're still having a relationship with these teams. An example is a VBS. Lots of short-term mission teams like to do VBSs. So instead of doing it in a residential home, can you do it through a local church? Your children and caregivers could attend. That's absolutely fine. The local communities, the families that may be at risk can attend. Everyone's getting connected to the church, which is a support structure in the community. You're facilitating long-term relationships and community integration. And now you no longer have this barrier towards transitioning towards family care where you say, but we can't do that because we won't have an orphanage. So a lot of it revolves around setting up the right type of model that says this model actually engages short-term missioners in a way that gets us where we want to go long-term to support the best interests of children.
Right, and you're talking about setting up the right model in the first place instead of trying to fix models that aren't working. And I think that's also an important point. And I'm gonna just take advantage of this opportunity to put a plug in for my own work on this and the model that, and it's meant to get you thinking more than it is to put in a plug for my own work. But I actually do take mission trips to Haiti on a regular basis. And I started actually a small nonprofit that is involved in coffee development with small scale farmers in really isolated rural parts of Haiti. And the mission trips are immersions into the life and situation of small scale coffee growers, right? So our trips basically they're relationship based, and they get to know the life of families who are intact, right? And they're intact because they're making enough money off of their coffee that they can support their families. And then part of what I ask those mission groups to do then is to be involved when they come back to their local church or their university. They support the work of these coffee growers by marketing their coffee in their own institution, whether it's their church or whether it's their university. So they actually, in doing that, become part of the solution. They become a witness to families who are intact, including families who are taking care of children from brothers and sisters who died from a disease or from violence, and they're able to take those children in. The reason why they're able to do it is because they have enough money, right? So they're immersed into intact families. It's relationship based. And when they come back to the United States, they support that work through coffee sales in their churches or other institutions. And I'm not saying it has to be coffee, but I'm saying every community has something going on that they produce, right? And you in your churches can be helpful and can be part of the solution when you support that. So I want to take a second here to just ask if there are questions from any of you before I ask more questions from the panelists. Do any of you have questions you want to ask us, or thoughts, or concerns, or have we upset you? Yes.
Does SOE have a lot of mission trips or medical mission trips, and they can be good and bad as well? Are there any kind of guidelines as to what those should be other than?
So the question is about medical mission trips, and are there guidelines for medical missions? Tori, do you want to start?
This is it's a great question. This work with the OVC world has opened our eyes to the possibility of developing best practices in other areas, and medical missions is one of those. We don't have a set of best practices like Faith to Action and CAFO have come up with, but we do have members who are engaged in medical missions and do a really good job of it, and we often connect people up in that way. So my email address, it's really short and easy, toryr@soe.org. If you personally want to email me, I can connect you up with one of our members.
Go ahead.
And I would just say quickly, I went to an SOE workshop a long time ago when somebody presenting it was a doctor and was very involved. So if you don't have the standard, or if you don't have the best practices today, I got them from somebody a while back. And so we have some best practices if you're participating medically that were developed from people smarter than us. So I would be happy to share those as well.
So in addition to that, just the Catholic Health Association does have a document on best practices in medical missions. And if you go to the Catholic Health Association website, CHA website, and you click on international, and they on their international programs, part of their website, they have a manual and a document that has best practices for medical missions.
There's also one called GASP, G-A-S-P. It's a group. It's an acronym for a group that is talking about students, medical students in particular, and what is and is not appropriate. So there's a lot of great materials out there.
Other questions from any of you? Yes.
What you all seem to be saying is there's an aspect of this work that is so complex and requires time that is just not amenable to the work you in particular said. Short-term groups aren't equipped, it's just not viable. This is long-term, slower, work that is slower in nature when you're talking about substantive issues like poverty, children who've been exposed to trauma, not amenable to short-term work. However, you all seem to be saying that if there is a sense that you can leverage the education and the relationships experienced by individuals, Westerners, into something more long-term, then there may be something redundant or something sustainable or substantive that comes out of it. Is that accurate? Or?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Tori, if you heard that. Do we need to repeat it for you?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can, but essentially, what your name, it's Lisa, was saying is that we're saying that it's difficult to be in a short-term mission format. It is difficult to really address the long-term root causes, but it is possible if you do your formation well, and I would just add partner well locally. If you have really good partners on the ground locally and do a good job of relationship building locally, then it is possible to be part of the solution, is essentially what your comment is, right? And yeah, the question or comment, yeah.
I just briefly to affirm that and call out that, I think short-term mission has always been something that doesn't solve a problem, but is part of the solution. It's something that comes alongside. I don't think it's the primary. If you think all the way back, honestly, Apostle Paul was a short-term missionary. He would come into a place and plant a church, and it didn't just stop. That wasn't the end. There was an ongoing presence. The job wasn't done when Paul left. So short-term missions has always been something that comes alongside, that benefits, that's a part of a solution, not a solution itself.
Totally think that's an excellent point, that we are, as short-term missioners, we are accompanying, right, a local community in their path to their own solutions, and we can contribute to that. We can be part of that path, or we can be part of the problem, and what we're advising is that we become part of that solution, accompanying that solution. Ellie and Nicole, you've got the mic, you go first, then Ellie.
That's like the dominance. Let's see. So I would just say something really short, that if we're going to take this from like the broader conversation to very specific to vulnerable children, when we're talking about these systemic issues and long-term chronic concerns, those, of course, they take time. They take a lot of investment of energy and resources and relationship. And so what a short-term mission can do in terms of specifically serving vulnerable children is being a part of helping the communities and families that care for those kids long-term to do that better. Mm-hmm. It's not about us doing the work, because we might be there for a week at best. I'm hearing people, I go there once a week or once a year for a week. That's pretty substantial. There are 51 other weeks out of the year. So we want to be all about serving and building capacity in the families and communities that care for those kids, forever and always.
Some interesting research, it wasn't super comprehensive, but that came out recently, was really looking at motivations for going on trips. And one of the things that resonated but also surprised me was that a big reason, I think it might have been the number one reason that people go on trips to orphanages, is because they think it will be easy. They didn't say it that way, but essentially like, I don't know, I don't have anything to give. This is complicated. I can't solve poverty. Well, I could probably connect with a kid even if they didn't speak a different language. And so I think it's a really important thing for us to recognize in this area, because a lot of people who are drawn to visit orphanages are doing it because they're a little bit worried about their impact, and they think this might be one way they could probably help. And it's pretty hard too when we go at the conversation as, no, you can't. right? Like that's all they're trying to do is help. And that's a good thing, right? It's a beautiful thing. Carrie Armbruster of Alliance for Children Everywhere out of Zambia, she's awesome. They're awesome. She talks about that desire is so important. That desire to protect a kid, to love a kid, to pick up a kid, to care for a kid is so, and kid is, some people don't like that word, a child, is instinctual, and it's important for the survival of all humanity. It's God-given. It is good, but we have to step back and unfortunately recognize that it's more complex than that. And that's what's tough, is to just step back and look at what's more, that it's more complex. I think we really have to be cautious that then people don't get turned away from that desire. Oh, that's too complicated. I can't do that one. Give me the easy one. Can I do medical? Can I do something else? Can I? We need support for children. We still do. And short-term missions still need to support children. But the two things I think that are really important that have already been highlighted, I think partnership has already been highlighted well by you guys. I think the other is the commitment after the trip. What are you going to do with what you've experienced and what you've learned? One is you can be an advocate for specific issues that are facing families and children in that community. Huge opportunity. The second, let's be honest, one of the best things we can provide in a mutually beneficial relationship is money. And recognize that you can come home, even if you don't have the money, you can get other people to support an organization that's doing really quality work. So what are we doing with after that time? The trip is not that important. I used to say this as a missions director. We're going to do some things. I worked really hard to make sure it was good stuff that would change their perspective. But it's what you do with it when you come home that's really important, and framing the conversation that way.
And I would add, I love thinking about it in the 1 week versus 51 weeks. And most people, if you have the capacity to go on a trip, right, ask the challenging questions of what are you doing when you get back? And I would add, what are you doing from a kingdom standpoint with your life where you live for the other 51 weeks of the year? And so, yes, be healthy and sustainable in what you're doing with your short-term mission, and then look to ask God what he's doing in your heart. There are vulnerable kids in every community in America, and it looks different than it looks in other countries. But what did Casey say her life dream is after being in 22 countries? She wants to be a foster mom because she knows that in her home culture, she can make a really big impact in the life of vulnerable children. So I think to challenge your team members with what are the other 51 weeks and what's God doing in your heart?
I think we're all saying the importance of what happens when we come back, and that we can support these communities and support children in general by the things we do here, including things like advocacy. And I think there's going to be some panels on that tomorrow. We have time for one more question from you guys, if anyone else has a question. Yes. I think we should give you a mic, maybe. No. No, we definitely want it. Otherwise, we can't hear you.
Well, it's sort of a comment. So I've been traveling to Sierra Leone since 2010 with HCW, so things have changed since then. And when this conversation started, HCW's done a fantastic job of preparing us and helping us understand, but like my legs started kicking and I was getting sweaty, just like remembering the orphanage and the things that happened there. And so like moving forward, like I wouldn't, looking at applications like just cross off all the baby holders or baby, like Ellie said, like I think like what HCW does is a great job of explaining the why and what happened, and also not to get caught up in the past.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that was so well said and so important, right? That we're all doing the best we can, and we're doing this because we're trying to be part of the solution. We want to help. We really care. That's why we're doing this. And to start from there and move forward, and we do the best we can, and we change when we get new evidence, right? That's all. So we have new evidence now, so we can change based on that. And we were doing the best we could in the past, and we're going to continue to do the best we can in the future.
And we're Christians, so we know that God's redeeming this world, not our own. And I think we can rest in that, knowing that. Preach here, Ellie.
Yeah, there you go, Ellie. So we have a few more minutes still. I wanted to just ask each of our panelists to say a few words, just your perspective on the future of short-term mission at this point. Where are we headed? And if you want to add to what you've already said about resources and what your organization or other organizations can offer in terms of resources that can be helpful to people who are here today. So do anyone want to start with that?
There's the whole who's holding the mic.
Who's holding the mic,
So
great.
since I've got the mic, echo what's being said about partnership and long-term context of relationship. I would say that's why we have seen healthy models is because it's long-term relationship between churches, so between believers. But I would say my heart for the future of short-term missions is to really see a paradigm shift. The phrase the SOE uses is mutual design, and to really ask ourselves hard questions about mutual design. What I feel maybe most strongly about after doing this for 10 years is how much I don't know and how much I feel like I can learn from my brothers and sisters in churches in other cultures. And what would it look like if we moved away from as has been mentioned, this is our thing that we're going to go do, build, fix, whatever. If the paradigm shifts to praise God that we have the resources so that we can go and spend time together. But that's really what we're doing. We're spending time together and we're asking, what do I have to offer? How can I support what's going on, what God's doing? And there's so much that I have to learn. And what does it look like for me to learn from my brothers and sisters who I'm spending time with? So
Thank you.
Tori,
you're next.
Yeah, I would say it's the short-term missions world is really hard to put trends to or make generalizations, because you have everything from 100-person church who does one trip every couple of years to big churches that send out 20 trips, organizations, with technology and just the culture. You have people come home from a short-term mission trip and start in a nonprofit, and they know nothing about it, but they started. So it's really hard to pick trends or stuff. But one thing I feel like I come across a lot, I don't know if it fits the context of who's all in the room there, but what I see is churches in particular, especially ones that do it regularly, are choosing to be involved more heavily in one area or one focus. And often that focus is the orphan and vulnerable children area, or any kind of vulnerable people or displaced people. So I would say just it really helps if you're on the agency side to get ahead of this with some of those best practices that are coming from CAFO and Faith to Action, and figure out how you can engage those who want to focus in the area really well. I think there's fewer and fewer churches who are just calling up and want to do a trip. And I think there's more who are saying we want to engage in this one area. So whether you're an organization or maybe you're a church who's looking at focusing in one area, of course, you're getting equipped this weekend to do that. And I would encourage you that it's okay. It's okay to say no to some really good things, because you're going to choose to focus and make a big, a deeper impact in one place.
great.
Thank you.
You guys are so smart. I think one of the things that I recognize is that Nicole brought up the tweaks idea, that and also just in general in this field, like a desire to do a little bit better, but maybe not best. And I think we have to, I think that's a part of the journey, is that some of it, let's try this a little bit, that won't get the donors too mad or upset our supporting churches too much. But I think that we just need to keep that trend in mind, and calling people, giving examples of transition and change, and really the opportunity there is behind that, instead of kind of this really cautious next step approach. So I think we just have to be willing and able to take some steps in boldness, and some organizations who have sometimes it's a little scary when I see it, but who have really started, and I think HWC is one of those who've said, we're going to tell our donors about this. We're going to tell them why we're making this change. We're going to invite them into the conversation. We're going to ask for their advice. We're not going to just do a little bit to try to avoid hurting kids. We're just our trips will just have less connection with kids or whatever. We'll just do one thing. We're finding that's not fixing the problem. And so I think that's a trend we need to keep track of. The other thing is really seeing more and more people, especially organizations that send a lot of people to an orphanage partner, considering what a responsible transition looks like. So I think we need to be cautious, just like changing the model of care for an orphanage to family-based care. It can't be done overnight. To consider as a partner, if you're visiting an orphanage, you are a partner. How can we help take next steps? We're not going to just drop our support and leave that organization and then the children in their care in a bad situation. So there's growing consideration around what transitioning support through short-term missions, which often means funding as well, actually means. So I think that is something we need to continue to grow and have more robust conversations about, especially those of us who run organizations that are sending a lot of people. But I think the big thing is just I'm excited to continue to see creative ways people are responding to this. I think especially non-Christians will go look at this and go, we need to do something about those Christians going out doing all this damage. We need to give them a better option. And we need to give them the 5 things they should do, or even as Christians, we'll do that. We'll talk, and I've been on many mission trips and I love these people, and I'm talking about we need to tell them what to do. I actually don't think that's the right way. We need to help them recognize that they are uniquely called and their partners are uniquely called on the ground to do something, and just allow them to be creative with the information that they now have. So when people say things like, well, what else are we going to do? I say, let's be creative. There are things we can do. And I think a couple of them have been shared here. But take a step back. Say, what could be really mutually beneficial to our goers and to the receivers? And try some things out. And you might not always hit a home run every time, but I'm excited to see more and more examples of how people are creatively engaging short-term missions to support children and families.
So we're out of time, but we're going to let Nicole have the last word. That's okay.
I do think, kind of expanding on that and the comment that was made, it really is about bringing people along in the journey and helping to equip them and inviting them to be part of it. People aren't doing this out of ill intentions. They're doing it out of not knowing a better way. So when we help educate them on the better solution and the role that they can play, so many of them are willing to quickly adopt that. And to that end, I would just mention too, HCW has been part of a focus group. We've had actually several focus groups to develop with 2 university partners an online training for participants that can help just gently educate them on some of the concerns and some of the solutions. So any of you would be invited to be part of that.
Yeah.
I don't want to take them home.
Yeah, Ellie's got tons of resources there, and their resources are top-notch, so grab some on your way out. And if anyone wants to have a deeper dive conversation about short-term mission, we are going to be at the 4 o'clock round table to talk more, and look forward to doing that. So we'll stop there.